Hey everybody, it is 6.2, Analyzing, Evaluating, and Interpreting the Use of Imagery. And this is all in preparation for the Paper 1 exam. So we're focusing on imagery, how to find examples of it, analyze, evaluate, and interpret them in an unseen short text through the formalist lens. All right, so the question you have in your mind, how do we find good examples of imagery and what do we do with them when we're encountering unseen texts? Remembering that these are the authorial choices, the building blocks of literature, and this is if your guiding question is about imagery. So far, the 2 times they've done paper 1 with a guiding question, they have had one question about imagery. So I'm betting on a question about imagery, but if they don't, you can see how you can do the same kind of thing with a different literary aspect, whatever it might be, by going through the process once with imagery. All right, let's take a look at the poem Late Love as we go through this. Late Love is in your packet in 6.1, and so just keep that in mind that we're going to be using that, so you will be flipping back and forth a little. Here's the definition of imagery. It's the verbal representation of sensory experience. Words that recreate one of the 5 senses. In literature, all 5 senses may be represented. Although we don't hear as much after visual imagery, you might have your other senses evoked. They each have a separate fancy name, and if you want to wow the examiners, you can be this specific and they will be impressed. You'll be able to score higher on the criteria. Visual imagery is what we call imagery that evokes a sense of sight. In the first line of Late Love, we have how they strut about, and that's a clear visual image. Sound is called auditory imagery. We have an example of that in Late Love in line 8, every church bell ringing. Touch or tactile imagery. There's an example in line 14, a touch in a changing room. I couldn't find any examples of smell, which is olfactory imagery. What a fun word that is. Or taste, gustatory imagery, another good 4-syllable word. 5-syllable word. But you might find those as well. And sometimes, even there, there's a mention of a kiss in this reading. Yeah, maybe that could evoke some of this. You might be able to argue that. All right. So, Late Love, let's take a look at all of the images. First of all, the sight images are in blue. And so you might want to highlight these in your packet. And if you're watching this in class, feel free to use any of my colors. I have colors everywhere. There are highlighters on the front table. There are colored pencils in a drawer on the counter. There are markers on my table, so you can find colors all over the place. So the first visual image is in line 1. They strut about. The second, how tall they grow. So these are things that we can imagine seeing. That's what makes them visual images. So you don't need to say that at all in your literary analysis. You don't need to say, I can really picture this, or this is interesting because you can picture it. That's not helpful because that's the definition of visual imagery. So you're going to want to go beyond that when you actually analyze it. Here's the next one. Their hair glossy, their skin shining. This one maybe also is evoking somewhat the sense of touch, but is probably most obviously sight or visual imagery. How about this one? Above the order of things. Just this perspective of being above evokes a sense of sight. Maybe also touch, that feeling of being above something. How dull The lot are that are not in love, their clothes shabby, their skin lusterless. These are all clear pictures for the mind's eye. Hair a mess. They trudge up and down the streets in the rain. That one might also arguably evoke the sense of touch with the trudging, and then also the wet rain. Maybe even the sense of smell. Maybe that's one where the rain might evoke the sense of smell, olfactory imagery. Remembering one kiss in a dark alley, sense of sight. And then I think the last sight is dimming now in the late day. Okay, then for sound imagery, every church bell ringing. Here's lovely wait for the phone to ring and secret hush. Then we've got touch or tactile imagery. I think the one kiss, a touch in a changing room, and rush of velvet are all clear examples of tactile imagery. Smell, maybe the rain, and taste, maybe the kiss. I don't know. All right. How about this idea of imagery being literal or figurative? That is an important question. It's important to look at. Once we've found some images, that's the first step, right? And you need to be able to do that. But the next step is looking at what kind of imagery is this, and then analyze it. So literal language means exactly what it says, while figurative language does not mean exactly what it says and uses comparison or hyperbole to make a point. What is hyperbole? It's when you're exaggerating. All right, so let's take a look at some simple examples here. Literal descriptions are things like the green grass sticks up inches from the ground. There's some imagery here. There's some sensory detail evoking the sense of sight. And it's literally describing the grass that's on the ground. Versus figurative descriptions like the spicy grass, not spicy, the spiky, that's a different kind of grass. The spiky grass looks like green hair. And so the like shows that it's a simile, it's a comparison between two things using modifying words such as like or as. So even though like the green hair, we can picture it, it's a little bit different than a literal description because it is a comparison to this spiky grass. And so we have spiky grass that we can imagine, visual imagery, and then like green hair is really a comparative image. And it creates a picture still for the mind's eye, but it just works a little bit differently. You see the difference there? Here's another one. See if you can understand this one. The sand is so hot from the sun, it hurts my bare feet. That's literal, right? Here's a figurative description of the same thing. The sand is a path of hot coals for my bare feet. The sand is not literally hot coals. It just feels that way. And so there's a comparison here between the sand and hot coals without that modifying word, and so it's a metaphor. Here's another example. The flower smells sweet. The figurative description, the flower has the sweetest smelling petals in the world. That's an exaggeration. It's a hyperbole. Last one, grasshoppers make a high-pitched noise. Literal, evoking the sense of sound, auditory imagery. Versus grasshoppers are fiddlers who play their legs. Personification. Turning the grasshoppers into people with legs that play them to make noise. All right, so that's just a quick reminder of the difference between literal and figurative. And it's something that's really important when it comes to guided literary analysis. All right, so when you are looking at late love, what have we got? Do we have any comparative imagery? Do we have any figurative examples of imagery? I think we do. I think it's at the very end of the poem. Look at this. The past with its rush of velvet, its secret hush already miles away, dimming now in the late day. What is velvet? The past. So that's not literal, right? The comparison between the past experience and velvet fabric rushing is a comparison. It's a metaphor. And then it goes on to say it's secret hush, already miles away. So this is the sound the past makes, again, figurative. Dimming now in the late day. Now it might actually be late day, but the past is dimming. And so that is some, again, figurative imagery or comparative imagery describing what it feels like to remember these past romantic experiences. So how would you write about this? You might say rush of velvet, if we're just talking about this image here, evokes the sense touching the plushness of velvet fabric and creates a sense of excitement and luxuriousness or pleasure associated with the physical aspects of romantic love and remembering them as the past. All right, let's move on to how we analyze imagery. I've got a bunch of questions that you're going to want to ask yourself as you're analyzing imagery. The first is, what senses does the imagery appeal to and how? What is literally being described? If there is comparative imagery, what is being compared to what? What is interesting about the use of imagery? What are some similarities and differences between the different images in the poem? What connections are there? And how do the patterns work together? Because this is really our main job, right, as formalist literary analysts, to look for those patterns and try to figure out how those patterns complement the content of the piece and work together to create meaning. All right, how about, make non-debatable claims here, okay? Non-debatable claims, claims that are true. Things that cannot be argued against. So if we're talking about late love, we could count the number of visual images and say there are 7 examples of visual imagery. Or we might say there are 2 patterns of images, one that describe people who are in love and another pattern of images that describe people who are not in love. And that's a non-debatable claim. Nobody can debate me on that. That is true. All right, if we move to evaluation, this is when we get to the thoughts and feelings that are created, right? So I got some more questions here for you. You're going to ask questions like, what effects are created by each individual image? What does each image make you think of? What does it make you feel emotionally? So you're kind of going beyond just looking at, what sense is evoked, which of the 5 senses. You're looking at kind of that deeper, emotional feeling. What effects are created by the pattern of images? What progression is made by the images? What seems to be the key repeating factor of certain images, and what are the effects of it? And oftentimes you'll get a hint from the guiding question, like the late love question is about the effects of people, of love on people, right? And so when we're looking at the imagery, we think, oh, okay, all of these images in the beginning have to do with people who are in love. Next come the images that connect to people who are not in love. What are similar there? Well, the first are full of life, right? And power and all those kinds of things. While the other images are dull and they're sort of powerless or aimless, don't have a sense of where they're going to go. What are the effects of the order of the images? So why put the people who are in love first and then the lot who are not in love? What is the effect of the order? And then ending with those final interesting comparative images of the past for the lot that is not in love when they're thinking about what it was like to be in love. Is it emphasizing the feeling the lot not in love has about what is lost and what they don't have? Something like that could be where you take that when you're looking at evaluating. What are the effects of the comparisons made in the comparative images? So looking specifically in those last 3 lines of Late Love, what kind of feelings, what kind of emotional feelings are brought up there? And I think I gave you an example already, right? That it sort of brings up the thrill of the physical intimacy of romantic love. All right. This one, now you're going to start making those debatable claims, supporting and explaining them. So you're moving from the non-debatable to the debatable. So these are things that maybe other people would say, well, no, it really emphasizes this aspect instead. And that's fine. As long as they can support it, that's just fine. You'll want to support what you say. How do you interpret imagery? So this is the last step of our 3-step process. Well, what is the theme or the topic in the guiding question? That is going to help you. And in the guiding question for Late Love, it was the effects of love on people. And so we know that that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the theme of the effects of love on people. How does the imagery connect to the guiding question? What interesting aspect do you notice about the imagery in the guiding question? Without reaching too far, you'll notice in the sample essay on Late Love, the student talks a lot about the actual images and how they work, and then makes some suggestions about some interesting things, including the redeeming nature of love, how love seems to make things look more physically attractive, and then also how love is kind of a cyclical process where there's some transience, it's not permanent, it's not forever. Those are 3 interesting aspects, but it's not as if they've said the poem shows that people who are not in love are treated badly, or people who are in love are a-holes. You know, there isn't that kind of like huge claim about the meaning of our cultural understanding of romantic relationships, you know, and so be careful, because that's the kind of profound understanding we're looking for. You don't want to reach too far and say, you know, the poet is against love or against those in love. And they're not. The poet isn't preaching. They're not up at a podium doing a TED Talk. They're not telling you how to live life. They are creating art that looks at some of the largest aspects of the human condition and commenting on interesting things about them. And that's all that you have to do as well. Here again, you're going to make debatable claims, being prepared to support and explain them. Okay, then I wanted to just give you a